just to make sure you're in the right place. This is mindful design, and we're going to look at designing curriculum through a lens of mindfulness, and then like daily things you could do in your classroom for mindfulness. I had to put all the time zones down there because I'm a little time zone challenged. I'm learning how to do time zones. Okay, so I'm gonna have this timer go in 2 seconds. Count how many different things you think about. Okay, so how many different things did you think about? I got 7, 10, 5. Did anybody have more than 25? I had a student once had 50. Okay, so the reason I like to do that is to think about in the first minute of class what you do with that minute. And it's a moment of transition, right? Like students are coming from somewhere else, even if you're switching subjects in an elementary classroom, it's a moment where they're processing where they were and where they're going, and they're processing ideas. So like you're in a moment of transition because you just left that pretty neat session with Jewel and now you're coming to a new session. So like, what are you doing with those thoughts, and then how do you prepare for the next one? And are we as educators facilitating that transition into the space, the learning space we want students to be in? So I know we've had like a pretty mindful morning compared to most starts to the day, but I am going to invite you to participate in a 1 minute mindful start to our session together. So this is a mindful minute.
Sit up tall and pull your belly in. Squeeze your shoulders up toward your ears. Really squeeze them up. Take a big breath in and let it out as you slowly drop your shoulders back down. Once more, squeeze your shoulders up toward your ears. Take a breath in and let it out. Slowly drop your shoulders back down. Now roll your shoulders in a circle. Lift them up, press them back, and let them come down. Do it again. Lift them up, press them back, and lower them down. Do a few more shoulder rolls, just a little faster. Now give your shoulders a little wiggle. Shake them out a little bit, and then hold still. Take one more long breath in, and let it all the way out.
So does that feel different, than just sitting with your thoughts? So that's like a CD for little kids. I got it because I'm a parent of a 7-year-old. But so like, that's just a thing I found in my library. But with my middle school students, I don't use her sing-songy voice. I just have them do the shoulder rolls. And you can choose what fits for you and your students. But that's one idea of something you could do at the beginning of class to kind of help set the tone for like being ready for something new or different, especially if you're digital. My school is still digital, so I try to think about like as they're coming in, what are we doing? So I want to give you a moment to set an intention for this session. What mindset or goal are you bringing to the work that we'll do together? And do you have a hope for what you will learn? if you want to write it down, you certainly can. Sometimes that's helpful for people. And if you want to share it in the chat, you're certainly welcome to. Sometimes it inspires other people. Okay, and then I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself to you and kind of where I'm coming from with mindfulness. So about 10 years ago, I teach in gifted and talented schools. I should say that the incidence of anxiety in gifted and talented teenagers tends to be higher than the general population. So I had a class of students about 10 years ago who were 90% of the students in my class, that's a real figure, had an anxiety diagnosis. So together we were like, this is not like a good way to live. Like, what can we do with this? And they inspired me to learn about mindfulness, which was not like a big thing 10 years ago. Like when I looked it up, I found 2 books. I was in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, and they have the Center for a Healthy Mind. So I had some resources, but we mostly were figuring stuff out. And a lot of things were for really little kids, not teenagers. So we had to like scale things up, and they were really on an experimental journey with me. And I would say that that's a really good approach for bringing it to students, because then they understand the reason why you're doing it and what works for them. Instead of just like, this is this thing I'm gonna make you do every day. And sometimes it's hard to remember that once you become more of an expert in something, but that like for them, it's still a new thing for a lot of them. When I actually experienced mindfulness for the first time when I was a pretty young person, because I had anxiety as a 6th grader. And I saw a psychologist who taught me to do walking meditation and like going through the zones of your body and like tensing and relaxing and tensing and relaxing. And nobody called them mindfulness, but those things worked for my students. So I also used those. And I honestly could say that I don't think that I would have made it through middle school if I hadn't had those tools. Like I was in a pretty unhealthy place. So I think like this is a tool that can save lives. And I guess that's what Jewel was telling us too. So I feel pretty strongly that the work we're doing is important. Okay, so the first thing that I want to start us with in terms of like actually using something in the curriculum is what is the purpose of school? Like in your head right now as an educator or somebody involved in schooling, what do you think the purpose of school is? And if you want, you could say out loud if you want to unmute, or you could put it in the chat. So far we have like prepared citizens of the world. Thank you, Stephen. Prepare students for the future.
I think about it as a way to like equip students to coexist with others and to interact with people with less struggle than they might feel they have.
Thank you.
Since I teach preschool, special ed and PFA students, I kind of view it as a way to build a foundation for, I tend to do more of the social emotional piece so that they can have a base to handle what they could, what they'll encounter as they get older and older. So just kind of start making those bricks for them.
So in the chat, we have to help you connect through intrinsic motivation, to teach students how to think and discover, give them tools for like experiencing things. So if, I don't know, if you're newer to teaching, maybe you already like entered a world of education where backward design was just the way things were, but like I kind of entered.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say reading and writing.
Yeah,
And
literacy.
thinking.
When I was going through the University of Michigan and Northwestern for my education studies, Grant Wiggins and backward design was like the thing. And so that was like what I came up into education through. And for me, like if you look at what is the purpose of school and you use that purpose as like the basis for how you design your curriculum, that then you get a different result than if you're looking at state standards or the Common Core. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those things are not important, just that it's sometimes our purpose is bigger than a discrete set of skills. So I want to encourage people to think about designing curriculum through mindfulness, because mindfulness is about experiencing the world and having the tools to connect with your emotions and other people. And that is an important part of being like a better citizen for a better future than maybe the place where we're at. So I call it kind of mindful design in homage to the backward design movement. And I tried to design the session using some of the things that I would do mindfully in my class. So it's color coded a little bit because I have a lot of students with executive function weakness, mostly because sixth graders, I think, all have executive function weakness. It's part of being a sixth grader. But also, I think it helps pay attention. So we'll start with intentionality and hopefully have some time to do a breathing exercise together, but I might cut that. We're running out of time. And then talk about some strategies for heightening awareness within the classroom, and then get to self-regulation and classroom management. So that's kind of the plan. This intentionality part is mostly the mindful design part, so it's kind of the bulk of what we're doing. If dual coding helps you and you want to sketch note or draw pictures, go for it. So I'm going to start with planning a mindful unit, and I have two resources in the drive full of resources that you can use. One is a blank sheet for planning a mindful unit, and one is the actual template that I have on the next set of slides. And I'm not going to read you the example one that's on the slides, just show it to you to kind of highlight what the differences are. So before you do anything, if you're not practicing mindfulness yourself, it doesn't really matter what you do in your classroom, because you're not prepared to self-regulate in the ways that require, that the students require. So sometimes I get nervous when I hear that big districts are going to implement a mindfulness program, because I'm no, they have to have people who really believe in mindfulness teaching mindfulness. You can't just force people to teach mindfulness. So I know this is preaching to the choir a little bit here. So in a traditional planning unit, you might start with an essential question, what's the core question we're going to study? So my example is about, why do humans tell stories? But in the mindful one, I try to start with, what are my students passionate about and what do they wonder about? So, and then I can use that to shape everything else that I do. So I have to be a little bit flexible to know, what are they actually curious about and what are they already invested in that I can connect to? And then after that, instead of just focusing on the learning objectives, which might come out of skills, I try to also think about neurodiversity and what do my students need in order to do these things that I'm anticipating that they're going to be able to do, and can I pre-scaffold them so that every student in the class can be successful at these things, and the students who are at the top of the class in terms of these skill sets are still feeling challenged and like they can grow. And that's a big ask for teachers. So I would say start small with the things you feel more comfortable with. I teach reading, and I've taught reading to twice exceptional and exceptional learners for a long time. And so I really think especially about kids who are struggling with reading because of dyslexia. Like, it's really easy to help them feel smart still, because dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. But a lot of teachers make them feel not smart because of their dyslexia. So that's like a really easy example of like, there's no reason that they can't listen to an audiobook and still have a really meaningful discussion. So I try to think about where can I implement scaffolding to make my students successful. And then like the student learning goals, I turn into intentions. And I try to think about these intentions as like, this is the place where your purpose for school gets translated to students. And I write these on the board, not the learning goals. And sometimes I come up with them with students. Like, I'll say, okay, so today we're going to work on close reading. So what's like the real world thing that this is preparing you for? And we come up with like a big picture idea. Like, what does it have to do with your human relationships out there, like when you're an adult? So I use the forest or the trees a lot, which they like. Like, my intention for you today is that you are the architect of your experience here, that you get to determine what am I going to take away. And I use that one with students a lot too. One of them told me I was the backseat driver to his education. I like that one a lot. Then like thinking about assessments here too, student needs come into play. Like, what do they need to feel invested in this work? Is it about choice? And where is that choice most meaningful? Like, if I really need to emphasize a certain skill, where is the wiggle room where they can bring in something that they're passionate about? And then the same is true for final assessment. And then this is maybe the most important one for older students, is a lot of times they have as many as 6 or 7 or 8 classes that they're managing, plus extracurricular activities. And a lot of times teachers are like, this is my class and this is the most important thing that they have in their whole life. And that's not true. Even if it is like their favorite class, it's probably not true. So I try to like engage them in, okay, so if we are going to have this big thing due, when's like a reasonable time frame for, like, do you have a big thing sitting on your calendar that's going to make it not reasonable? Or like, check the school calendar, what else is going on? Or how many other assessments do they have at any given moment in time? But then also I actually put onto my planning calendars that like as we get nearer toward the end of a unit, I teach in a project-based school. So as we get toward the end of a project cycle, I space things out more so we have more time for mindfulness actually within each lesson. And that's because they are more anxious when something is due, right? Like, we know that. So with younger students, that is probably like more like they need a routine of when it's going to be happening and they can expect it. But you know, if you're doing a project cycle or a unit cycle where it comes to an end, usually the end is the more stressful time. So you teach them the skills that they need to be mindful when they're not so stressed, and then practice the mindfulness when they're more stressed. So I try to like put it actually on my calendar, because like Tracy said earlier, or maybe it was Barnaby, sometimes it's easy to be like, well, we have so much to do today, so we're not going to do mindfulness. But if you like committed it to your plan already, it kind of reminds you, oh yeah, we are doing that today. So I know goal setting is really big, and I'm done a lot of training in executive function, and the SMART goal is like the thing. but I have a hard time with the SMART goals because I don't like the measurable part. Like I get why that exists, but like to tell a student they have to measure it is really hard. So it also kind of emphasizes grades in a weird way. So I kind of invented this for myself based on a different thing that exists. I don't remember the original acronym. But so I think of them as like every student's a work in progress, right? Like every human being is a work in progress. So that's like WIP. And so then like, what's their wish? They, the students told me this year that they really hate that word because like a wish is not an attainable thing. So I'm, like I might change it because they don't like it, but you could ask your students and see what they think. And then what's the intention behind the wish? And that's kind of like their mantra, like in reading and writing conferences, sometimes I'll even like bring it up like, hey, have you reminded yourself of this intention recently? And it like resonates with them. They're like, oh yeah, that's a thing I came up with. And then what's your pathway toward making this wish a reality? And then they kind of make a plan, but it doesn't feel like a regimented schooly plan. It's like I don't know, it feels very natural. Like, oh, I could imagine myself doing that thing, which then leads to this, which is actually visualizing themselves in that role. What does it look like when this wish becomes a reality? And then to bring in emotional granularity, what will it feel like? And the students who did this this year, like we're pandemic living, right? Like this was harder for them than it was for students last year to think about what will it feel like. So I think you can see that strain on like as they're emotionally overwhelmed, that it might be harder. And it led to some pretty good conversations.
Gabrielle, did you say this is in your handouts, correct?
Yeah, so I have, this is I have a note up on the side that it's like a usable slide. You could just make a file, make a copy, and you could Peer Deck it or Nearpod it or whatever you want with it. So I filled out an example too, and that's in there, so you could modify it and use it as an example with students. A lot of times they're like, parents will be like, oh, it was so brave you shared this with them. And I'll be like, I don't feel like it's brave. It's like the work, right? Like, so I try to teach parents that they should do it too, like talk to their students through stuff or their children. So like within each day, within a class, I guess let me pause. Do you have any questions about any of that? That was a lot of stuff.
Where are the slides?
It's all in the custom drive. I can put a link. I actually like made a handout. Hold on. That has all my stuff together on it in one spot.
I think Laura shared a link also in the chat. It's in the conference program. There's a link, but like I said, Laura shared it there as well.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions about any of that?
Nope, that link is perfect. I tried it. It takes you right there and you'll see two folders with your handouts and
Oh, I meant, does anybody have any questions about the unit planning or the goal setting?
I just have a question on the goal setting activity. Is that something you would just kind of randomly do, like a check-in every few weeks? They come up with a new intention plan, or what does that look like in your classroom?
So we actually do it every quarter. We do student-led conferences. So they use that as like the framework for the conference that they do with their parents or guardians or family members. Like, so we kind of give them a chance to reset. Like, do you want to keep this one or change it? I have seen some research that suggests that doing it like weekly might be more valuable because like if you think about younger people, like how long can they sustain a particular like goal or idea for? or even just to check in with it. I do, like, I mention it to them much more often than like every 9 weeks, because I have weekly reading and writing, like one-on-one conferences. And I often bring up their goals and like hopes in those things. Because I try to tie a lot of, like, what we're trying to do, we're an integrated project-based school. So they have like multiple teachers, but we're all teaching like together multiple things, which is a little bit of a different framework than most schools. But so like their science teacher also is like talking to them about these things each week, and their math teacher is talking to them. So it's like a shared document. Like you wouldn't probably want them to have to do that in 9 classes. So it might be more of an advisory activity and then share it with all the teachers. You know, that would be like the nice way to do it in a larger school. Okay, so within each like day of teaching, things that I try to really think about through a mindful lens are, am I sharing an intention with them or helping them create an intention for our time together? What am I doing for the first minute and the last minute of class? Because I feel like I have a responsibility to transition them to wherever they're going, because I can't promise that they're going to get that where they're going. And then, you know, there are like a gazillion ways to take the emotional temperature really quickly. Like when we were in person, I would often just put a Post-it note on each of their desks, and like they would draw an emoji or write one adjective for how they were feeling. And I could pick them up while they're doing something else. On longer days or days where we're learning about like emotion words, there are lots of different like emotion cards, or the ones that are like, which cat are you today? Or which Matthew McConaughey. You know, there are a lot of those that exist. And Pear Deck actually has some very nice ones that are like free for teachers to use, where you can like have them, you could even just like use the image and have them say like, where am I on this thermometer? And then I try to also plan into each lesson, like, did I give them time to reflect? Did I give them time for retrieval practice? Did I give them time to process? Or like, is it all just information? And then I have sensory sensitivity to light. So just because of me, I have like ambient lighting in my classroom. And a lot of students have expressed that it makes them feel more comfortable to be in a space with ambient lighting. I've also had students who've been like, the low lighting is giving me a headache. I needed like a brighter light. So we actually think about like, where is your seat in the classroom in relation to the lighting that's best for you? And do you have any say over that? Do you have natural light that you can use? How is space allocated? Like, are you as the teacher sitting in the best seat in the room? And is that fair necessarily? Like, I don't ever use my teacher desk. So some people like sit a lot. I'm a mover. So maybe it is fair. Like maybe kids are coming to you and it's like a shared workspace. But I had a teacher of 3rd graders once tell me that she like rearranged her room for equity, that she felt like the learners are the most important people in this space, and I'm here to guide them on that journey. So like they should have flexible seating and choice. And so that's really helped me think a lot about middle school, that sometimes we take that away from middle schoolers, but they really still need that. And even in high school, like sometimes, like I am much smaller than many teenagers. You know, like, does my chair need to be bigger than theirs? Probably not. Last year I had a student who didn't fit in the school's chairs. So I just gave him my chair. Like, he shouldn't have to be uncomfortable all day. And then to have sensory stations, which now you could put in like those little like marker caddies, so that they could be individual, because you can't like have students walking up and going to sensory stations. I actually sent all of my students little wool balls that they could put like lavender or like lemon oil on, you know, something so they could have like a sensory smell, and they put them in little glass jars like from spices that they had. So they have their own little sensory station at home. It was not very expensive, you know, to get like little I don't even know what they're called, like pom-pom balls. But also like some students are, if you ever have the chance to talk to an OT, I would say like an OT is like a teacher's best friend, because like some students really need things to press against, and some students like need not to have sensory stimulation. And so like to have options for where they can sit and be in a classroom space and have those things is like, my daughter is a child who like likes to push her feet up against stuff. Like it's like how she self-soothes. So that's like an example. If she has one of those rubber bands across the bottom of the desk, she's like much more comfortable in the space than if her feet are just dangling. But then like there are some students that those just like make them feel like, I can't be in this chair. Why is this thing on this chair? So I guess getting to know them and finding out at the beginning of the year, or even in the middle of the year check-in, like, hey, how's the room working for everybody? If you could change one thing about the classroom or your seat, what would you change? I think also like a lot of times students are thirsty and hungry, and it's really hard to self-regulate if you're thirsty and hungry. So that's a good reminder too. So like we should check in. Are you drinking water? And I guess the biggest problems with classroom management that I see from other educators are that they think that one mistake defines the student. And I try to think of instead, like with everything, and I tell the students this too with each other, because middle schoolers make mistakes with each other all the time. They're kind of like preschoolers, bigger, that like one mistake is not the same as a pattern. And if somebody's treating you not nicely one time, that might be about them. Like they're bringing something into that space. But if they're not nice to you multiple times, now you have a pattern, and then we can like work on solving it. But let's not just assume that like maybe they said something rough because like their mom was just mean to them in the car, right? Like we don't know what happened. And then to ask them later after they've had a chance to calm down, like what would you do differently next time, is a really powerful opportunity, even if it's not like an altercation with another student or with you, but just like maybe they didn't do as well on something as they had hoped they would, or like they didn't bring their best to their group work that day. So like the next day, be like, hey, next time you work with a group, what might you do differently? Really gives them the chance to reframe it. And like a negative thing can become a positive thing because now they have a plan. How does that fit with your vision or your wish? And then, so I briefly taught at a school in Maryland that was much, much larger than the school I teach at now. And a lot of times my students who were choice exceptional learners, a lot of them had ADHD, were asked to return to the learning community without any guidance. So they'd be removed from the classroom and then brought back in. And for them, that was scary. And people didn't acknowledge that. Like other educators would just be like, okay, come back in. But they'd be like, no, I'm like so embarrassed. Like you sent me out of the room. And like, I didn't mean to do the thing I did. And now I don't know what to do. So just to even say like, hey, when you come back in, we're going to be working in groups and you can just kind of like sit back in your seat and nobody's going to notice you're coming back in. Like taking the minute to notice and acknowledge that they're like a person with emotions can really make that moment feel like, oh, this is a safe space where I'm cared about. And I did some love and logic training as a parent. When I was a young teacher, somebody was like, you should do love and logic training. And I was like, I don't need that. Kids like me, I'm fine. And then I was a parent of a toddler and I was like, I need some help. And so like love and logic is really, it gives you some powerful language choices that reframe the way you talk to students about classroom management. And I like this one the best, which is, I care about you too much to have this conversation right now, or I care about you too much to argue about this. Let's put a hold on that and talk about it when we're both feeling ready to talk about it, which can be hard. But like in that moment, you're modeling mindfulness for them. And so that's the idea of like, Is it that they can't behave or that they won't behave? And even more as we think about equity in classrooms, am I seeing them as a person who's learning how to fit into a community, or am I expecting them to meet my expectations of behavior within a community? There's a woman named Lauren Porosoff who does a lot of work with emotions and values in learning. Her husband is a psychologist and they produce these things together. So she has this book called 2-for-1 Teaching, which I would highly recommend. And this is something that comes from her newer book, which is called Empower. And it looks at like, in order to reduce pain and suffering and increase vitality, sometimes you have to change your behavior as the educator. And sometimes you have to guide the student's behavior. And I think sometimes we just expect them to change. So it's like a good reminder to remember, like, oh, hey, did I do something that made that worse? And then also that like anything we can do to actively teach perspective taking, which is like in every single discipline in school, and to acknowledge it as perspective taking and talk about point of view and perspective taking, that like acknowledges mindfulness too, that like, what are other people bringing to this conversation, or what are other people bringing to our community? So I do it with current and historical events, with literature, and there are some handouts in there that use RAIN with like recognize, allow, investigate, not identify, with historical figures or characters from literature. You could do it with science experiments. The depth and complexity icons are like ways of adding depth to thinking that are really come out of gifted education, but they're applicable to all students. But one of the depth and complexity icons is the language of the discipline. And the language of the discipline changes for each discipline, right? So that's like an opportunity to say, when we're studying this, we use these types of words, and that's part of our perspective, that we have this vocabulary. And then if you use the design process to really emphasize that empathy is the first step of the engineering design process, and empathy is mindfulness. Like you can't engage in empathy if you're not being mindful. And to talk students through, anytime you feel like you're doing something that's mindful, to be like, hey, I just did this neat thing. Let me tell you what I did. Because they use us as examples. I'm going to skip this because I suspect you know most of these things. I post signs up all over the room that say stuff like this. That we don't always know, like if you were in a like let's say you're driving your car and I'm assuming you have a car, you're driving your car and you like somebody almost hits your car, your first reaction is a personal reaction, but then you might think like, do I need to feel anger at that person? Like, I don't know why that happened. Like maybe somebody's screaming at them in their car, or like maybe they just got some scary news, or maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Like I can feel fear more than anger in that moment. So I also try to like not just put the signs up, but talk to the kids about the signs so that they know why they're there. This one comes from a specific book about gifted children and mindfulness, but I like this one, that just like me, other people are learning about life. I have another one up that says learning is a journey and not a race, which my students often need to hear. They like to think of it as a race. And then also, so like I'm a millennial, so I'm from the self-esteem generation. Like my little siblings got a trophy for every single thing they did. I'm a little too old for that, but like their trophy rooms are still in my mom's house. But so like to really shift that into self-compassion and thinking like, are we teaching them how to be kind to themselves? Like I have had so many conversations with young teenagers where I say, would your best friend ever say what you're thinking about yourself to you? And they say no. And to remind them, like, you could be your best friend, right? Like you can think nice things about yourself. You can you could talk to yourself the way you would want a friend to talk to you. You don't have to always be like narrating. They're like replaying whole conversations in their head and overthinking and getting trapped in loops. And we can help teach them, like, you don't have to do that. You could stop. You could experience like self-kindness. Am I being mindful in my treatment of myself? This is just a quote from James Baldwin about how important our modeling is. It's like our superpower in the classroom. So these are opportunities where you can model mindfulness. So again, RAIN is to recognize, allow, investigate, and non-identify. And when we get to awareness, I can talk through that more specifically, what that might look like. Also, a lot of students have a hard time getting started with something. So like, how often do you model what getting started looks like? Like, if I were on task right now and I'm starting to write an essay, I might need to get out my book and my notes from class and open the doc that is shared to Google Classroom. That's 3 steps of things that a student might be really stuck on. And sometimes the whole class needs to hear that. And sometimes the student needs a post-it note placed on their desk that has that list of things on it, or like a note sent to the chat. Like, hey, here's what maybe you could do to get started. And then sometimes I model for them like, oh, hey, I'm going to speak at a conference and I'm really nervous about it. So here's what it looks like when I talk to myself about that. Or, you know, the principal's coming to observe class today. And so, you know, like, this is why it matters. But also this is how it makes me feel. And I bring that into class, I guess, modeling and talking it through. That's really true for executive function things too. Like, they think that adults just magically plan their world. They don't understand all the tools adults use. So like, how often have they seen your planner? Okay, so if you kind of just check in, like, do you have questions that you feel like you aren't getting answers to? Are you bored? Do you need to like stretch a little? Do something, you know, that if you need to move or wiggle around, adjust your shoulders.
Excuse me, I have a question. I was wondering what else you put in like your sensory stations besides like the smell, the pom-poms with the scent, if there were other suggestions that you found have worked well for your students.
Yeah, I always have little felt squares that are soft, because they can kind of take those and I don't really care if they disappear. And they sometimes students sit with them. I also usually have rock, like smooth ones from, I live in Tacoma, Washington, so I just take them from the beach. But, you know, like river rock, not like rough hard ones. I know a lot of people have like beans because they're not as messy as sand. And then they can push them through thinking putty. And that resistance of pushing them through is really important. For me, smell is really important. I think we forget about smell. And also middle schoolers sometimes smell bad. And it's like really unfortunate if you have to sit next to somebody who's stinky. So like if you have a wool ball that smells like lemon, it's much more pleasant. I usually have coffee beans spread out throughout the room too. There are these really cheap tubes that are plastic that have like gel in them with stuff in them, and you can like push them. Those are a pretty good like sensory tool because they don't make any noise and you can't like throw them. But like 7th grade is a really bad time for them because like the inappropriate jokes abound. So like not 7th grade, but at other times. And they can even make, like, I'll show you glitter jars later, but they can make glitter jars and keep them on their desk. It's kind of a fun project if you have a little extra time. Okay, so I think We were going to do a breathing mindfulness activity, and I think we have time to do it. How are you feeling? Would you like to do a breathing mindfulness activity? Yes. Okay. So I do like to put a plug in for one nostril breathing. I've had a lot of students say that, like on standardized tests like the SAT or ACT, when they feel like high stakes important, one nostril breathing has saved them because they learned how to do it in middle school and then they practiced on like any time when they were nervous between them. So if you haven't ever done that, there's like, you can even have Hillary Clinton teach you on YouTube videos. But it's a really discreet way to do anxiety calming activity because nobody needs to know you're doing it. Like the kids kind of just sit there and like go like this. So that is a self-regulation technique you could teach them. Okay, so find a comfortable spot. Maybe if you've been sitting, you want to stand. This is going to play pretty rainforest nature things while I read. You don't have to look at the screen if you don't want to. Begin by taking several long, slow, deep breaths, breathing in fully and exhaling fully. Breathe in through your nose and out through your nose or mouth. Allow your breath to find its own natural rhythm. Bring your full attention to noticing each in-breath as it enters your nostrils, travels down to your lungs, and causes your belly to expand. Notice each out-breath as your belly contracts and air moves up through your lungs, back through the nostrils or mouth. Invite your full attention to flow with your breath. Notice how the inhale is different from the exhale. As you turn more deeply inward, begin to let go of noises around you. Simply notice sound and then bring your attention back to your breath. Don't try to control your breath. If your mind wanders to thoughts or plans or problems, notice that your mind has wandered. Watch a thought as it enters your awareness and practice letting it go like a leaf floating down a stream. In your mind, place each thought on a leaf and watch as it floats out of sight. Then bring your attention back to your breath. Your breath is an anchor you can return to over and over again when you become distracted by thoughts. Notice that your mind has wandered. Observe the types of thoughts that hook or distract you. Noticing is the richest part of learning. Practice centering around your breath with your full attention. Maybe place a hand on your belly and watch the gentle rise of your stomach on the in-breath and the relaxing letting go on the out-breath. Maybe you become distracted by a pain or discomfort. Maybe something's itchy. You might also have feelings like sadness or happiness, frustration, tiredness, contentment. Acknowledge those feelings without making a story about your experience. Simply notice where your mind went, and then you can practice pushing it away. Breathe in and breathe out. Follow the air all the way in and all the way out. If your mind wanders away from your breath, just notice without judging it. As this practice comes to an end, slowly allow your attention to expand and notice your entire body, and then beyond your body into the room and space you're in. When you're ready, open your eyes. Maybe rub your palms together and press them against your eyes. The breath is always with you as a refocusing tool and a tool to bring you back to the present moment. How are you feeling? Is anybody tired? A little. Sometimes at the beginning of doing mindfulness, students will say they're tired. I also have noticed over the years that the first 2 weeks of doing mindfulness, they're often more dysregulated than prior to starting mindfulness. And so some teachers give up in those 2 weeks. They feel like, oh, this is making my job harder. So I would say press through that starting point and maybe even talk about it. Like, hey, this is sometimes hard, because also sometimes sitting with your thoughts, it doesn't feel good. I actually usually offer students, instead of the breath, to have one of those felt squares, and they can focus on what does it feel like to touch the square every time I say breath instead. And that's a more trauma sensitive approach, especially for students who have asthma. Sometimes focusing on their breath is a triggering experience, especially if they've had an asthma attack.
All right, we're at about 1.5 minutes left. Just
okay. So I guess there are lots of resources in there. I really like the RAIN activities that I have that kind of force students to think about when a character or a historical figure made a choice, what were their values and emotions involved in that choice. And you can scale that down or up to any grade level. So hopefully people can use those to apply them. And if you go through the slides and you have a question about something that's later, I'm happy to answer any questions. You can always email me. Sorry for being a little long. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you.
If you take a minute to think about one thing you want to try, and kind of set that intention for yourself, that would be super. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good time in your next session.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.